You're not broken. Your thoughts are just too loud. Learn how to quiet the noise and make better choices that change your life. Critical Thinking. Audiobook by Rowan March. Published by Inner Impact Books. Introduction. You feel it daily. That overwhelming surge of information, opinions, and choices flooding your consciousness. In moments when clarity matters most, your mind becomes a turbulent sea of competing thoughts. Important decisions loom while deadlines press in. Relationships demand careful navigation. Career choices carry weight. The pressure to make the right call intensifies, yet your thinking grows cloudier. The modern world bombards you with more information in a day than your ancestors processed in a month. Social media algorithms curate your reality. News cycles spin endlessly. Experts contradict each other. What seemed clear yesterday becomes uncertain today. You know you possess the capacity to think clearly. You've experienced moments of profound insight and decision-making brilliance. But these moments feel increasingly rare, replaced by mental fog and emotional reactivity. When faced with complexity, you might find yourself trapped in analysis paralysis, second-guessing every option until opportunity passes. Or perhaps you swing the other way, making snap judgments you later regret. Your mind circles familiar paths, wearing deeper grooves of habitual thinking that limit fresh perspectives. Uncertainty breeds anxiety, and anxiety clouds judgment further. Imagine your mind as a mountain lake. In its natural state, the water is crystal clear, reflecting reality with perfect precision. You can see straight to the bottom, where wisdom lies like precious stones. But winds of emotion stir the surface. Sediment of bias clouds the depths. Mental noise creates ripples that distort everything you try to see. The clarity is still there. It's your natural state. But accessing it feels impossible. This book isn't about teaching you new thinking techniques or burdening you with complex frameworks. Instead, it illuminates the forces that disturb your mental waters and reveals how to allow them to settle naturally. The SMART principles: slow down, map perspectives, ask better questions, recognize patterns, test assumptions, serve as gentle reminders, guiding you back to your innate capacity for clear thought. You already possess everything needed for profound clarity and insight. The wisdom you seek isn't something to acquire, but something to uncover. Like the still mountain lake, your mind knows how to reflect reality accurately. The journey ahead isn't about becoming someone new. It's about recognizing and removing the obstacles that prevent you from accessing your natural state of clear, composed thinking. As we explore these principles together, you'll discover why your most firmly held beliefs might be your greatest blind spots, how emotional triggers hijack rational thought, and why certainty often leads you astray. More importantly, you'll learn to recognize these patterns as they emerge, creating crucial space between stimulus and response where true critical thinking flourishes. The path to clarity begins with a single ripple of awareness. Are you ready to discover the still waters of wisdom that already exist within you? Chapter 1. The Turbulent Mind. Why Clarity Feels So Elusive. Imagine facing a life-altering decision with mere moments to respond. Your pulse quickens, thoughts race. The weight of potential consequences bears down, while competing options swirl in your consciousness. In this pressure cooker moment, your mind, typically your greatest asset, becomes your biggest obstacle. This mental turbulence isn't unique to crisis moments. Throughout each day, your mind generates thousands of thoughts, many contradicting each other, most arising unbidden. Like waves on an ocean, these thoughts create constant movement in your consciousness, making it difficult to see beneath the surface to deeper wisdom. Your brain evolved primarily for survival, not clarity. The same neural mechanisms that kept your ancestors alive now create excessive mental activity in response to modern challenges. When facing uncertainty, your mind instinctively generates scenarios, considerations, and potential threats, an evolutionary feature that protected you from predators, but now floods your consciousness with unnecessary worry about future presentations or social interactions. These survival circuits activate your threat response system, releasing stress hormones that further agitate your mental waters. A single concerning thought triggers a cascade of related worries. One possible negative outcome spawns visions of catastrophe. This isn't weakness or failure. It's your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do, scanning for danger and preparing for the worst. This natural tendency creates what we might call thought storms, self-perpetuating cycles where one anxious thought feeds another. An upcoming deadline triggers worry about performance, which escalates to career concerns, which expands to financial security fears. Each thought builds upon the last, creating a vortex of mental activity that pulls you deeper into turbulence. Yet within this storm lies a crucial insight. You are not your thoughts. Just as you can watch storm clouds pass across the sky without becoming the weather, you can witness mental activity without being consumed by it. This distinction between being caught in thought versus witnessing thought creates the first opening for clarity to emerge. Take a moment now to notice your own mental activity. Without trying to change anything, simply observe the thoughts moving through your awareness. Notice how they arise, persist briefly, and fade, like clouds passing through an endless sky. This sky-like awareness remains constant regardless of mental weather. This simple act of noticing without immediately engaging represents your first step toward mental clarity. When thoughts arise about work stress, relationship challenges, or future uncertainties, you can acknowledge their presence without immediately diving into their content. This creates a subtle but powerful shift from being helplessly swept along by mental currents to standing on the shore, observing their movement. The difference becomes apparent in real-time application. When an urgent email arrives, rather than immediately reacting to the surge of thoughts and emotions it triggers, you can notice this mental activity while maintaining enough presence to respond rather than react. When relationship tensions arise, instead of being consumed by defensive thoughts, you can observe this mental pattern while staying connected to the actual situation at hand. This capacity to witness mental turbulence without becoming it isn't a skill to develop, but an innate ability to recognize. Just as your eyes naturally see and your ears naturally hear, your awareness naturally notices. No special technique required, only the recognition that you are the space in which thoughts appear rather than the thoughts themselves. This fundamental shift in relationship to thought creates the foundation for all critical thinking. In the space between stimulus and response lies your power to choose, but only when you can recognize this space exists. As mental turbulence settles through simple recognition, natural clarity begins to emerge. In the modern wilderness of information overload and constant connectivity, this ability to witness rather than become your thoughts serves as an essential compass. It guides you back to clarity precisely when you need it most, not by adding more thought, but by seeing through the illusion that every thought demands immediate attention or belief. This recognition opens the door to a radically different relationship with your own mind. Rather than fighting mental turbulence or seeking to control it, you can allow it to settle naturally through the power of aware presence. Like muddy water that clears on its own when left undisturbed, your thoughts begin to organize themselves when met with simple awareness. You no longer need elaborate techniques or forceful intervention to find mental clarity. Your natural intelligence emerges spontaneously when you stop trying to wrestle your mind into submission. Chapter 2. The Space Between. Finding Freedom in the Pause. You're driving on a familiar road when suddenly a car veers into your lane. In that fraction of a second between perception and action, something remarkable happens. Time seems to slow down. Your awareness expands. Multiple possibilities flash through your consciousness. This brief yet profound gap between stimulus and response contains the essence of human freedom, the power to choose rather than merely react. This space, this pause, is where critical thinking begins. It's the difference between wisdom and impulse, between conscious choice and automatic reaction. Yet, in our fast-paced, hyper-connected world, this vital space has become increasingly compressed. The constant barrage of information, decisions, and demands creates a habit of instant response, bypassing the natural wisdom that emerges in moments of clarity. Consider how often your interpretations and reactions seem to happen simultaneously with events themselves. A colleague's comment triggers an immediate emotional response. A news headline provokes instant judgment. A challenge generates automatic stress patterns. These rapid-fire reactions feel natural because they've become habitual, but they represent a collapse of the space where true discernment lives. This gap between stimulus and response exists in multiple dimensions. Physically, it manifests as subtle body sensations, a catch in the breath, a tension in the shoulders, a shift in posture that precede action. Cognitively, it appears as that flickering moment when you first notice a thought arising before fully engaging with it. Emotionally, it's the instant between feeling triggered and becoming consumed by the emotion. The challenge isn't creating this space. It already exists naturally. The challenge is remembering to access it, especially under pressure. When stakes are high, time is short, or emotions are intense, our conditioning pulls us toward immediate reaction. Yet these are precisely the moments when the pause becomes most crucial. The three breaths practice offers a simple but powerful way to reclaim this space in any situation. The first breath creates initial distance from reactivity. The second breath allows awareness to expand beyond the immediate trigger. The third breath opens space for clearer perception to emerge. This isn't about relaxation, though that may occur, but about accessing your natural capacity for discernment exactly when you need it most. In challenging moments, even a microsecond pause can dramatically alter outcomes. When a deadline looms, pausing might seem counterproductive. Yet this brief space often reveals efficiencies or insights that save more time than the pause itself requires. When emotions run high, the impulse to act immediately can be overwhelming. But pausing doesn't mean suppressing or denying these feelings. It means creating space to respond to them wisely rather than react from them blindly. The pause becomes most powerful when practiced regularly in lower stakes situations. Each time you notice the gap between stimulus and response, you strengthen your capacity to access it under pressure. Like a muscle, this awareness grows stronger through consistent exercise. Start with simple daily moments, the space between your phone ringing and answering it, the pause before responding to an email, the breath before entering a meeting. As this capacity develops, you'll notice an expanding sense of choice in situations that once felt automatic. What seemed like inevitable reactions reveal themselves as habitual patterns that can be engaged with, consciously. This growing awareness doesn't eliminate challenges or emotions, but it transforms your relationship with them, revealing options that were always present but previously invisible to a reactive mind. This foundational space serves as the ground for all other critical thinking skills. Without it, even the most sophisticated analytical tools remain theoretical rather than practical. With it, your natural wisdom has room to emerge, informing your choices with clarity rather than conditioning. Paradoxically, trying too hard to create this space often generates more mental turbulence. The key lies not in forcing a pause, but in recognizing the space that already exists between every stimulus and response, a space that contains unlimited potential for clearer perception and wiser action. Like trying to smooth ripples on a pond by pressing down on the water, your efforts to manufacture calmness only create more disturbance. Instead, when you simply acknowledge the natural gap that exists in every moment between what happens and how you react, you tap into a wellspring of clarity that's been there all along. This space isn't something you need to create or earn. It's your birthright, waiting patiently beneath the surface of your habitual reactions. Chapter 3: The Clarity Paradox. Why trying harder clouds your thinking. You're searching for a specific word. It's right there on the tip of your tongue. The more intensely you focus on finding it, the more frustratingly elusive it becomes. Your mind races through possibilities, each attempt feeling more forced than the last. Finally, you give up, only to have the word effortlessly surface moments later when you're thinking about something else entirely. This common experience reveals a fundamental truth about the nature of mental clarity. Sometimes, our very effort to think clearly becomes the obstacle to clarity itself. Much like trying to peer through muddy water, the harder we stir and search, the more we obscure what we're trying to see. Consider what happens in your mind and body when you're trying to force understanding or recall. Muscles tense. Breathing becomes shallow. Mental focus narrows to a laser point, excluding potentially relevant information from your awareness. This state of heightened effort activates your stress response, flooding your system with chemicals that, while useful for immediate survival, actually inhibit the broader, more nuanced thinking needed for genuine insight. The impact of this over-efforting extends far beyond memory recall. When wrestling with a complex decision, pushing harder for clarity often leads to mental gridlock. In creative endeavors, forcing inspiration typically yields stilted, mechanical results. During challenging conversations, straining to find the perfect response usually produces exactly the opposite effect. Your mind, like a mountain lake, naturally tends toward clarity when undisturbed. Mental sediment, thoughts, worries, analysis, gradually settles on its own when not constantly stirred by effortful thinking. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning intellectual rigor. Instead, it suggests a different kind of mental engagement, one that recognizes the distinction between productive effort and counterproductive striving. Productive effort maintains clear intention while holding attention lightly. It's the difference between gently scanning a room for your keys versus frantically searching the same space over and over. The first approach allows your natural perceptive abilities to function optimally. The second creates a stress response that actually narrows vision and reduces cognitive flexibility. You might notice signs of over-efforting in your own thinking process, thoughts becoming increasingly circular, frustration mounting as solutions remain elusive, awareness contracting rather than expanding. These symptoms signal that you've shifted from effective cognitive engagement to counterproductive mental straining. This dynamic plays out across numerous domains. In problem solving, forcing an answer often leads to recycling the same ineffective approaches. During conflict resolution, trying too hard to find the perfect solution can blind you to simple compromises hiding in plain sight. When making important decisions, excessive analysis frequently creates paralysis rather than clarity. The cultural conditioning to equate effort with progress makes this paradox particularly challenging to navigate. You've likely internalized messages suggesting that thinking harder equals thinking better. While mental effort certainly has its place, recognizing when it becomes counterproductive is equally crucial for effective critical thinking. The natural clarity of your mind emerges most readily in a state of relaxed alertness, awake and engaged, but not straining. This state allows you to maintain broad awareness while remaining receptive to subtle insights and unexpected connections. It's the difference between trying to remember something and allowing it to be remembered, between forcing understanding and letting understanding arise. Consider how often your best ideas come not during intense concentration, but in moments of relaxation, during a shower, on a walk, or just after waking. These insights emerge not because you've stopped thinking entirely, but because you've released the mental grip that was actually preventing clarity from emerging naturally. The key lies in recognizing when thinking itself has become an obstacle. Just as you can't force yourself to fall asleep, the very effort prevents the natural process from occurring. You sometimes can't force mental clarity. In these moments, the skillful approach involves stepping back from effortful thinking and allowing your natural intelligence to operate unobstructed. This doesn't mean abandoning active engagement with challenging situations. Rather, it suggests approaching mental clarity more as a process of discovery than conquest. By learning to recognize when effort becomes counterproductive, you can shift into a more effective mode of cognitive engagement, one that works with, rather than against your mind's natural tendency toward clarity. Much like a photographer waiting for the perfect moment when light and subject align naturally, you'll find that wisdom emerges most powerfully when you create the right conditions and then allow understanding to surface on its own. Your role shifts from forcing solutions to cultivating the inner environment where insights can bloom undisturbed by the noise of excessive mental activity. Chapter 4: Emotional Intelligence, the Heart of Critical Thinking. When strong emotions surge through us, they can feel like waves threatening to overwhelm our rational mind. In moments of anger, fear, or intense desire, even the most logical person can find their carefully cultivated decision-making abilities swept away by the sheer force of feeling. This emotional tide presents what appears to be an impossible choice: suppress our feelings to think clearly, or surrender our clarity to emotional currents. Yet this perceived conflict between emotion and reason rests on a fundamental misunderstanding of how our minds actually work. Emotions aren't the enemy of clear thinking. They're an integral part of it. Modern neuroscience reveals that our emotional systems process vast amounts of information and deliver sophisticated assessments faster than conscious analysis ever could. These emotional signals serve as rapid response guidance systems, highlighting what deserves our attention and informing our priorities in ways pure logic cannot match. The challenge isn't the presence of emotions, but our relationship with them. Without awareness, emotional currents can indeed hijack our thinking, creating distortions and reactivity that cloud judgment. However, with understanding and practice, these same emotional signals become invaluable allies in critical thinking, offering intuitive insights that complement analytical reasoning. Return to our mountain lake metaphor. Emotions are like currents flowing through the water, neither inherently destructive nor beneficial. Their impact on clarity depends on our ability to recognize and work with these flows, rather than fighting against them or being swept away. Just as a skilled navigator reads water currents to plot their course, emotional intelligence allows us to understand and utilize emotional information in service of clearer thinking. This integration of emotion and reason operates through three key dimensions. First is emotional awareness, the capacity to recognize feelings as they arise, before they overwhelm conscious thought. This fundamental skill creates the crucial space between emotional activation and response, allowing us to witness our feelings without immediately acting on them. The second dimension is emotional literacy, accurately identifying and interpreting emotional signals. Each emotion carries specific information about our relationship with current circumstances. Anger often points to violated boundaries or unmet needs. Fear highlights potential risks requiring attention. Even seemingly negative emotions offer valuable data when we learn to read them accurately. The third dimension is emotional regulation, not suppression, but the ability to maintain mental clarity even amid strong feelings. This skill develops naturally from awareness and literacy, as understanding our emotional patterns reduces their power to overwhelm us. These dimensions work together to enhance critical thinking in crucial ways. When facing complex decisions, emotional awareness helps us recognize how feelings influence our judgment. In conflicts, emotional literacy allows us to separate reactive impulses from genuine insights. During high-pressure situations, emotional regulation maintains the mental space necessary for clear assessment and response. The process of developing emotional intelligence begins with simple recognition. By acknowledging emotions as they arise, without immediately judging them as good or bad, we create distance from their immediate impact. This practice of emotional naming, literally putting words to our feelings, activates neural networks that reduce emotional reactivity while maintaining access to emotional wisdom. Scientific research confirms the power of this approach. Brain imaging studies show that verbal labeling of emotions calms the amygdala's threat response, while engaging prefrontal regions associated with conscious awareness and regulation. This physiological shift creates the conditions for clearer thinking precisely when we need it most. Importantly, this integration of emotion and reason transcends cultural conditioning that often pressures us to either suppress or be ruled by our feelings. Different cultural and gender-based expectations around emotional expression can create additional challenges in developing emotional intelligence. The key lies in finding an authentic relationship with emotions that honors both their wisdom and the need for clear thinking. You might have grown up hearing that strong people don't show emotion, or conversely, that expressing every feeling validates your authentic self. Both extremes miss the deeper truth. Emotions are neither enemies to be conquered nor masters to be blindly obeyed. They are messengers carrying vital information about your experience, offering insights that pure logic alone could never reveal. When you learn to welcome these messages while maintaining your capacity for reasoned judgment, you discover a more nuanced and powerful way of navigating life's complexities. Chapter 5. The Illusion of Certainty. Embracing Doubt as a Path to Wisdom. The moment hits you like a splash of cold water. That instant when you realize something you've been absolutely certain about is wrong. Perhaps it's a long-held belief about success, a confident prediction about a market trend, or an unquestioned assumption about human nature. The ground shifts beneath your feet as certainty crumbles into doubt. leaving you wondering what other truths might not be as solid as they seem. This uncomfortable experience touches a fundamental aspect of human nature, our deep craving for certainty. Your brain, evolved for survival in a dangerous world, strongly prefers definitive answers over ambiguity. Uncertainty triggers the same neural circuits as physical threat, which explains why you might feel anxious or resistant when your certainties are challenged. Yet this very drive for certainty often becomes the greatest obstacle to clear thinking. Your mind rushes to conclusions before fully exploring questions, gravitates toward information that confirms existing beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence, and maintains unwavering confidence in judgments that deserve more scrutiny. These mental shortcuts served your ancestors well when quick decisions meant survival. But in today's complex world, they often lead to intellectual blind spots and flawed reasoning. Consider how your need for certainty manifests in daily life. You might find yourself forming opinions before gathering sufficient information, defending positions more rigidly than evidence warrants, or avoiding information that might challenge your existing views. These patterns stem not from intellectual weakness, but from your brain's natural tendency to seek stable ground in an uncertain world. The distinction between harmful and helpful doubt proves crucial here. Paralyzing cynicism, the kind that endlessly questions everything without moving toward understanding, serves no productive purpose. But strategic skepticism, the willingness to hold beliefs provisionally while remaining open to new information, creates the mental space necessary for deeper insight and more nuanced understanding. This openness to uncertainty doesn't mean abandoning conviction or falling into relativistic thinking where all positions seem equally valid. Instead, it means developing what you might call comfortable uncertainty, the capacity to act decisively based on current understanding while maintaining the humility to adjust those actions as new information emerges. Your relationship with certainty shapes every aspect of your thinking. When you believe you must be absolutely sure before acting, you limit your ability to explore, learn, and adapt. When you demand definitive answers to complex questions, you often settle for oversimplified explanations that ignore important nuances. But when you learn to embrace uncertainty as a natural part of clear thinking, you discover a more expansive and effective way of engaging with reality. Think about how differently you might approach problems if absolute certainty were impossible. Rather than seeking the right answer, you might explore multiple possibilities. Instead of defending positions, you might investigate alternatives. Where you once saw threats to your certainty, you might find opportunities for learning and growth. The practice of productive doubt offers a practical path forward. This approach involves systematically questioning assumptions while maintaining forward momentum. You're not doubting for doubt's sake, but using strategic skepticism to test and refine your understanding. When facing important decisions, you might ask, what assumptions am I making? What evidence might I be overlooking? How could I be wrong? This stance proves particularly challenging in high-stakes situations where confidence seems crucial. Yet even here, perhaps especially here, the ability to hold space for uncertainty while taking decisive action based on current understanding often leads to better outcomes than rigid certainty or paralyzing indecision. Your comfort with uncertainty directly impacts your capacity for clear thinking. When you resist uncertainty, you often grasp at false certainties that limit your perception and understanding. But as you develop greater comfort with not knowing, you create the mental space necessary for genuine insight to emerge. This openness to uncertainty becomes not a weakness, but a source of intellectual strength, allowing you to engage more fully and effectively with life's inherent complexity. Just as clarity emerges naturally in still water, clearer thinking emerges when you stop churning up false certainties and allow yourself to rest in the space of not knowing. This doesn't mean abandoning discernment or conviction, but finding a more nuanced and ultimately more powerful way of engaging with reality. The wisdom of uncertainty extends far beyond mere intellectual humility. As you learn to embrace the unknown, you discover that your greatest insights often emerge not from what you think you know, but from the spaces between your knowledge. These gaps that once felt threatening become doorways to deeper understanding, inviting you to explore rather than defend. Your mind naturally seeks solid ground, craving the comfort of definitive answers and absolute truths. But life rarely offers such certainty. When you resist this fundamental reality, you create unnecessary tension that clouds your judgment and limits your perception. The very act of clinging to certainty often prevents you from seeing the subtle nuances and hidden possibilities that could lead to breakthrough realizations. Chapter 6. Mental Models. Maps that guide your thinking. Picture yourself navigating through an unfamiliar city with an outdated map. The streets marked on your map exist, but new construction has added paths, buildings have been demolished, and whole neighborhoods have transformed. Your map, once reliable, now creates confusion rather than clarity. This perfectly illustrates how our mental models shape our thinking, simultaneously guiding and constraining our understanding of reality. Mental models are the invisible frameworks through which you interpret everything, from simple daily interactions to complex global systems. They're not just abstract concepts, but active filters determining what you notice, which questions arise, and what solutions seem possible. These models form through your education, cultural background, professional training, and accumulated life experience, operating largely beneath conscious awareness. Think of how differently various professionals might approach a struggling organization. A financial analyst sees balance sheets and cash flow problems. An organizational psychologist notices communication patterns and leadership dynamics. A systems thinker observes feedback loops and interconnected processes. Each perspective reveals valuable insights while inevitably missing others. No single model captures the full complexity of reality. Your brain relies on these mental shortcuts to navigate life's complexity without overwhelming your limited cognitive resources. Without mental models, you'd be paralyzed by the need to analyze every situation from scratch. However, these same models can become invisible prisons, constraining your thinking within familiar patterns even when fresh perspectives would serve you better. The true power of critical thinking emerges not from having the right mental model, but from developing the flexibility to shift between different frameworks intentionally. This capacity for model switching expands your perceptual range, revealing options and insights that remain invisible when viewed through a single lens. Consider how your understanding of personal conflicts transforms when you shift from a model of right-wrong to one of differing needs, or how business challenges appear different when viewed through short-term versus long-term lenses. Each shift in perspective reveals new aspects of reality, expanding your range of possible responses. One particular challenge arises from expertise itself. The very knowledge that makes you effective in your field can create significant blind spots. The more deeply you master a particular way of thinking, the harder it becomes to see beyond its inherent limitations. This expertise bias explains why specialists often struggle to solve problems that seem obvious to outsiders with fresh perspectives. Similarly, we often become emotionally attached to familiar models, defending them even when they no longer serve us well. This model attachment manifests as resistance to new perspectives, even when our current framework clearly isn't working. The comfort of familiar thinking patterns can override their practical utility. Developing mental flexibility doesn't require abandoning your existing models. They remain valuable tools. Instead, it means holding them more lightly, recognizing them as maps rather than territories. This awareness creates space to try on different perspectives intentionally, especially when feeling stuck or limited in your current understanding. The practice of model switching begins with simple awareness. When facing a challenging situation, pause to identify which mental model you're currently using. What assumptions does it contain? What aspects of reality does it emphasize or minimize? This recognition alone often reveals how your habitual framework might be limiting your perception. Then, experiment with viewing the situation through completely different lenses. How would this challenge appear through the eyes of a different profession, culture, or time period? What would nature's solution be? What would you notice if you had no prior knowledge or expectations? Each shift reveals new aspects of reality, expanding your range of possible responses. This mental flexibility serves as a meta skill that enhances all other aspects of critical thinking. It creates the cognitive space needed to question assumptions, consider alternatives, and generate novel solutions. Most importantly, it helps you recognize when your current mental models have become outdated maps, no longer matching the territory they attempt to describe. The key lies not in discovering perfect models, they don't exist, but in developing the ability to navigate between different perspectives fluidly, choosing the most useful framework for each situation while remaining aware of its inherent limitations. This flexibility transforms critical thinking from a rigid analytical process into a dynamic exploration of possibility. Your mind becomes a skillful dance between viewpoints rather than a march toward absolute truth. As you embrace this fluid approach, you'll notice how different angles illuminate hidden aspects of each challenge, revealing opportunities invisible from any single vantage point. The true power emerges not from finding the right perspective, but from your growing capacity to shift smoothly between multiple ways of seeing, extracting wisdom from each, while avoiding the trap of becoming overly attached to any particular view. Chapter 7. Slow Down. The Power of Deliberate Thought. The moment is all too familiar. You hit send on an important email, and seconds later your stomach drops as you spot the glaring error, the unintended tone, or the crucial detail you overlooked. In that instant of clarity, always arriving a moment too late, you recognize how a brief pause could have prevented hours of damage control. This experience reflects a broader truth about human cognition. Our minds, like fine instruments, require proper calibration and timing to function optimally. Yet in today's accelerated world, we've normalized a pace of thinking that undermines our natural capacity for clarity and wisdom. Speed has become a cultural virtue, celebrated in everything from growth hacking to rapid iteration. We glorify quick decisions and instant responses, equating faster with better. This mentality infiltrates our thinking processes, creating an artificial urgency that clouds judgment precisely when clarity matters most. Research consistently demonstrates how time pressure impairs critical cognitive functions. Under rush, our minds default to familiar patterns rather than exploring alternatives. We miss subtle signals that might indicate flaws in our reasoning. Our ability to recognize our own assumptions diminishes, and our capacity for ethical consideration narrows. These impairments occur regardless of intelligence or expertise. They are fundamental limitations of accelerated thinking. This doesn't mean all slow thinking is beneficial. There's a crucial distinction between deliberate reflection and unproductive rumination. True strategic slowness creates space for clarity to emerge naturally, like allowing sediment to settle in a mountain lake. Rushing to clear the water only creates more turbulence. Patience allows clarity to arise on its own. You might object that modern life doesn't allow for contemplative pauses. Deadlines loom, demands multiply, and competition rewards speed. Yet this perspective misses a crucial truth. The costliest mistakes often result from false urgency rather than true time constraints. The time saved by rushing frequently creates larger problems that require far more time to resolve. Consider how your mind operates when genuinely calm versus artificially rushed. In calmness, you notice nuances, recognize patterns, and maintain perspective. Under artificial pressure, your thinking narrows, overlooks crucial details, and loses touch with broader context. This difference in quality far outweighs any nominal time savings from rushing. Strategic slowness doesn't require meditation retreats or lengthy contemplation. Often, mere moments of deliberate pause at crucial junctures can dramatically improve outcomes. These brief intervals allow your natural intelligence to surface, providing insights that rushed thinking inevitably misses. The key lies in identifying your critical decision points, those moments where clarity matters most. Perhaps it's before sending important communications, during challenging conversations, or when making decisions with long-term implications. At these junctures, even a 30-second pause can shift the quality of your thinking from reactive to responsive. Modern psychology confirms what ancient wisdom has long known. Certain cognitive processes cannot be rushed without sacrificing quality. Like digestion or sleep, thinking has natural rhythms that, when honored, produce optimal results. Pushing against these rhythms might create an illusion of efficiency, but ultimately undermines effectiveness. This principle becomes particularly vital in our age of information abundance. When faced with complexity, our instinct often drives us to act quickly, to reduce uncomfortable uncertainty. Yet this impulse typically increases rather than decreases confusion. True clarity requires giving your mind space to process, integrate, and synthesize information naturally. The practice of strategic slowness begins with recognizing the difference between genuine urgency and habitual rushing. Most situations that feel urgent actually aren't time-critical at all. They simply trigger our conditioned response to speed up. Learning to distinguish between these scenarios creates space for more deliberate choices about pace. When you pause to examine what's driving your impulse to hurry, you'll often discover it stems from anxiety or external pressure rather than true necessity. This insight alone can transform how you approach decisions, shifting you from reflexive acceleration to intentional pacing. Your mind works best when given room to breathe, to weigh options carefully, and to notice subtle signals that rushed thinking inevitably misses. Chapter 8. Map Perspectives. Seeing Beyond Your Viewpoint. You've likely heard the ancient parable of the elephant and the blind men. Each person touches a different part: trunk, tusk, leg, tail, and arrives at a completely different conclusion about what stands before them. One insists it's a snake, another a spear, another a tree trunk, and yet another a rope. Each perspective contains truth, yet none holds the complete picture. This timeless wisdom illuminates a fundamental principle of critical thinking. Every viewpoint, including your own, represents just one facet of a larger reality. Your perception, shaped by identity, experience, and belief systems, creates invisible boundaries around what you can see and understand. These boundaries persist precisely because they're invisible to you. Like water to a fish, they form the unquestioned background of your reality. Your brain naturally filters information to confirm existing beliefs, a process so automatic and efficient that you rarely notice it happening. This filtering occurs through multiple layers. Cognitive preferences that determine how you process information, emotional patterns that direct your attention, cultural frameworks that shape your values, professional expertise that specializes your knowledge, and personal experiences that color your interpretations. Consider how a physician, economist, sociologist, and psychologist might view the same public health crisis. Each brings valuable expertise, yet each perspective illuminates different aspects while potentially obscuring others. The physician focuses on medical interventions, the economist on resource allocation, the sociologist on community impacts, and the psychologist on behavioral factors. None are wrong, but none alone captures the full complexity. This recognition transforms the metaphor of mental clarity. Rather than viewing your mind solely as a mountain lake that needs settling, imagine yourself on a mountaintop where different vantage points reveal different aspects of the valley below. True clarity comes not from finding the right position, but from developing the ability to move between multiple viewpoints. You might notice resistance arising at this suggestion. The human mind craves certainty and naturally defends its current position. This defensive response often intensifies precisely when perspective taking would be most valuable. During conflicts, when facing complex decisions, or when cherished beliefs are challenged. Yet this resistance itself offers valuable information. When you feel strong aversion to a particular viewpoint, this often signals an opportunity for growth. The perspectives that trigger the strongest reactions frequently have the most to teach you about your own blind spots. Expanding perspective doesn't require abandoning your current position or accepting every alternative view as equally valid. Instead, it involves developing the capacity to temporarily inhabit different viewpoints while maintaining awareness of your own. This skill creates mental flexibility without sacrificing discernment. The practice of perspective mapping begins with simple recognition. In any situation that matters to you, pause to identify the viewpoints you're not naturally considering. Who else is impacted by this issue? What different frameworks might they use to understand it? What aspects might be visible from their position that you can't see from yours? This mapping process reveals how different positions illuminate different aspects of reality. A conflict with a colleague looks different when viewed through the lens of organizational dynamics, personal history, cultural differences, or systemic pressures. A personal decision transforms when examined through the perspectives of different time frames, immediate impact versus long-term consequences. As you develop this capacity, you'll notice subtle shifts in how you engage with opposing views. Rather than immediately arguing or dismissing, you might find yourself genuinely curious about how others arrive at their conclusions. This curiosity doesn't require agreement. You can understand a perspective deeply while still disagreeing with it. The most powerful perspective shifts often come from engaging with viewpoints that feel wrong or uncomfortable. When you encounter strong resistance to a particular position, this resistance itself becomes valuable data. Rather than avoiding or arguing, you can explore what this reaction reveals about your own assumptions and blind spots. Your capacity for perspective taking grows through deliberate practice. Each time you encounter a viewpoint that differs from your own, you have an opportunity to expand your mental map. This expansion doesn't happen through passive exposure, but through active engagement, deliberately trying to understand how another position makes sense from within its own framework. With each interaction, you're building neural pathways that make future perspective taking easier and more natural. The initial discomfort you might feel when engaging with opposing views gradually transforms into intellectual flexibility, like a muscle that strengthens with use. You begin to recognize that every perspective, no matter how foreign it initially seems, contains its own internal logic and coherence, even if you ultimately disagree with its premises or conclusions. Chapter 9. Ask Better Questions, the Art of Inquiry. The quality of your questions determines the quality of your thinking. When faced with complex challenges, the instinct is often to rush toward answers. Yet true clarity emerges not from having all the answers, but from asking questions that illuminate what was previously hidden from view. Questions act as mental flashlights, directing attention and shaping perception in powerful ways. When you ask, "What's wrong with this situation?" you'll naturally focus on problems and deficits. Ask instead, "What possibilities exist here?" And your mind immediately begins scanning for opportunities and potential. The question itself creates the lens through which you perceive reality. This shaping power of questions operates largely beneath conscious awareness. Your habitual questions, the ones that automatically arise in response to challenges, create well-worn mental pathways that can either expand or limit your thinking. Consider how differently your mind engages when you ask, "Why can't I figure this out?" versus, "What am I not yet seeing?" Questions function at different levels of depth and sophistication. At the most basic level, information gathering questions help establish facts and details. Yet even here, the framing matters tremendously. "Did you meet the deadline?" yields different information than, "How did the project timeline work for you?" Moving deeper, assumption testing questions help surface and examine hidden beliefs that may be constraining your thinking. Rather than asking, "How can I solve this problem?" you might ask, "What am I assuming about this situation that makes it appear problematic?" Perspective shifting questions deliberately expand your view beyond familiar territory. Instead of, "What should I do?" try, "How would this look to someone with completely different priorities?" These questions create psychological distance that enables fresher thinking. At the deepest level, paradigm-challenging questions examine the fundamental frameworks through which you interpret reality. Questions like, "What if the opposite were true?" or "What am I not questioning?" can reveal blind spots in your most basic assumptions about how things work. The power of skilled questioning becomes particularly evident in complex domains where cause and effect aren't immediately clear. Surface-level questions tend to yield surface-level understanding, but questions that probe deeper layers of reality, examining relationships, patterns, and systemic factors, can reveal insights that transform your entire approach to a situation. Your capacity to formulate powerful questions directly impacts your ability to think critically and creatively. Yet this skill often remains underdeveloped, partly because education systems traditionally reward having answers rather than asking insightful questions. The good news is that questioning ability can be systematically improved through conscious practice. The key lies in developing questions that open rather than close inquiry, that invite exploration rather than demanding immediate answers. Notice how, "What's the solution?" creates pressure to arrive at a single answer, while, "What approaches haven't we considered?" naturally expands the field of possibilities. This isn't about adding complexity or getting lost in endless questioning. Rather, it's about developing questions that effectively serve your thinking needs at different stages of inquiry. Sometimes you need questions that converge toward specific answers. Other times you need questions that diverge to generate new possibilities. Your questions determine which aspects of reality become visible to you and which remain hidden from view. By consciously cultivating more sophisticated questioning practices, you expand your capacity to perceive and understand the complexities of any situation you face. The practice of question cultivation involves developing a personal repertoire of high-leverage questions suited to different thinking challenges. These become powerful tools for cutting through mental fog and accessing deeper clarity. Rather than accepting the first questions that arise, pause to consider. What question, if answered, would provide the most valuable insight right now? This practice transforms how you engage with challenges across all domains of life. Whether facing personal decisions, professional challenges, or broader social issues, the quality of your questions shapes the quality of your thinking, and ultimately, the quality of your choices and actions. When you refine your questioning ability, you begin to notice subtle dimensions of situations that once remained invisible. A relationship conflict that seemed hopelessly stuck suddenly reveals new possibilities for resolution. A business challenge that appeared insurmountable shows unexpected paths forward. Even the most daunting social problems begin to shift from overwhelming abstractions into specific areas where meaningful action becomes possible. Your questions become keys that unlock doors you never knew existed, revealing opportunities hidden in plain sight. Chapter 10. Recognize patterns. Finding order in complexity. In the night sky, countless stars twinkle seemingly at random. Then, in an instant of recognition, meaningful shapes emerge. Orion's Belt, the Big Dipper, ancient constellations that have guided travelers for millennia. This transformation from chaos to order, from randomness to meaning, illustrates one of the most powerful capacities of human consciousness: pattern recognition. Your brain is an extraordinary pattern detection machine, constantly scanning reality for meaningful relationships, recurring forms, and predictable sequences. This ability serves as both your greatest cognitive strength and a potential source of confusion. The same neural machinery that helps you recognize faces in a crowd, anticipate traffic patterns, or grasp complex concepts can also lead you to see connections where none exist. Pattern recognition operates at multiple levels of awareness. At the most basic level, you unconsciously detect regularities in your environment. The subtle shift in a colleague's tone that signals disapproval, the barely perceptible changes in market behavior that precede major shifts. These intuitive pattern recognitions often occur before conscious awareness, manifesting as gut feelings or vague sensations that something is changing. At deeper levels, pattern recognition enables you to understand complex systems and relationships. Causal patterns reveal how actions lead to outcomes, often through intricate chains of influence. Structural patterns show how elements arrange themselves in recurring forms across different contexts. Process patterns illuminate how sequences unfold over time, while thematic patterns highlight conceptual similarities that bridge seemingly unrelated domains. However, this powerful pattern-seeking tendency can also mislead. Your brain's desire to create meaning sometimes results in seeing patterns in random data, like finding shapes in clouds or conspiracies in coincidences. This tendency, known as apophenia, served our ancestors well, Better to mistake a bush for a predator than vice versa. But in today's complex world, it can lead to false conclusions and misguided decisions. The key distinction lies between genuine patterns, consistent relationships supported by evidence, and illusory ones born from expectation or wishful thinking. Genuine patterns demonstrate reliability across different contexts and withstand careful examination. They offer predictive value and practical utility. Illusory patterns, while sometimes compelling, tend to fall apart under scrutiny or fail to generalize beyond specific instances. Your capacity for pattern recognition grows with exposure and experience. Expert chess players don't just see individual pieces, they perceive meaningful configurations that suggest strategic possibilities. Similarly, experienced professionals in any field develop pattern literacy specific to their domain. Doctors recognizing symptom clusters, investors spotting market trends, educators noting learning dynamics. This pattern of literacy can be systematically developed through conscious practice. The first step involves slowing down enough to notice patterns without immediately jumping to conclusions about their meaning. When you think you've spotted a pattern, pause to consider. Is this an actual relationship I'm observing, or am I imposing order on randomness? The practice of pattern testing provides a structured approach to this evaluation. Instead of accepting initial pattern recognitions at face value, deliberately seek alternative explanations. Look for disconfirming evidence, instances where the pattern doesn't hold. Consider whether the same data could support different interpretations. This critical examination doesn't mean rejecting intuitive pattern recognition. Rather, it suggests developing a more sophisticated relationship with this fundamental cognitive capacity. Sometimes the patterns you notice will prove illusory. Other times, they'll reveal genuine insights that logic alone couldn't uncover. The most powerful insights often emerge when you combine intuitive pattern recognition with systematic validation. This balanced approach allows you to benefit from your brain's natural pattern-seeking abilities while protecting against cognitive biases and premature conclusions. Pattern recognition becomes particularly valuable when dealing with complexity. In a world of information overload and rapid change, the ability to discern meaningful patterns while avoiding false ones becomes increasingly crucial. These patterns serve as mental models that help you navigate complexity without becoming overwhelmed by details. Your effectiveness in any domain largely depends on your ability to recognize relevant patterns. Whether you're analyzing data, solving problems, making decisions, or understanding relationships, pattern awareness provides the foundation for deeper insight and more effective action. As you develop this capacity, you'll find yourself noticing patterns that were always present but previously invisible to your awareness, like suddenly seeing constellations in what once appeared as random stars. This expanded pattern recognition transforms how you perceive and interact with reality. The shift occurs gradually at first. Perhaps you start recognizing subtle emotional patterns in your relationships, or recurring themes in your decision-making process. But once this awareness takes root, it becomes impossible to unsee these connections. Your world expands as seemingly disparate elements reveal their hidden relationships, offering insights that illuminate paths forward you never knew existed. Chapter 11. Test Assumptions. The Scientific Mindset. In our rapidly evolving world, what worked yesterday may not work today. Yet many organizations and individuals continue operating based on outdated assumptions. These invisible beliefs shape decisions, limit possibilities, and often go completely unexamined until something forces us to confront them. The most powerful breakthroughs often come not from adding new information, but from questioning what we think we already know. Assumptions form the foundation of all thinking, creating an invisible architecture that shapes how you perceive, decide, and act. They operate like mental shortcuts, allowing you to navigate complexity without constant analysis. Yet these same shortcuts can become prison walls, constraining possibilities to what you already know to be true. Your assumptions exist in layers. Surface assumptions are relatively easy to spot. Beliefs about specific causes and effects, expectations about how things should work, predictions about what will happen next. Deeper assumptions form the framework of your worldview. Fundamental beliefs about human nature, how success happens, what's possible or impossible, what's worth pursuing or avoiding. The most powerful assumptions often hide in plain sight, disguised as common sense or the way things are. They become invisible precisely because they seem so obviously true that questioning them feels pointless. Yet history repeatedly shows how breakthrough innovations and paradigm shifts come from challenging exactly these kinds of obvious truths. You need assumptions to function. Trying to question everything simultaneously would paralyze you. The key is distinguishing between necessary working hypotheses that enable action and limiting assumptions that restrict possibility without justification. Necessary assumptions serve as temporary scaffolding, held lightly and revised when evidence suggests otherwise. Limiting assumptions function more like concrete walls, blocking exploration of alternatives regardless of evidence. Your brain naturally conserves energy by operating on autopilot whenever possible, making it easy for assumptions to become self-reinforcing. When you expect certain outcomes, you notice evidence that confirms those expectations while overlooking contradictory information. This confirmation bias creates a closed loop, where assumptions shape perception, which then strengthens those same assumptions. Breaking this cycle requires deliberate effort. The practice of assumption archaeology involves systematically excavating and examining the beliefs that structure your thinking. Start with visible conclusions and work backward, asking, what would have to be true for this to make sense? Each answer reveals another layer of assumptions to investigate. Testing assumptions doesn't mean rejecting them all. Many will prove valid and useful. The goal is bringing unconscious beliefs into awareness where they can be evaluated rather than letting them operate unopposed below the surface of consciousness. This creates choice where before there was only automatic reaction. The most powerful assumption tests often come from reality itself rather than pure logic. Instead of just thinking about whether an assumption makes sense, look for ways to gather direct evidence. Small experiments yield concrete data that either supports or challenges your beliefs, creating a feedback loop that gradually refines your mental models. When examining assumptions, watch for emotional resistance. Strong feelings often signal deeply held beliefs worth investigating. Notice also the assumptions you inherit from your professional training, cultural background, and social circles. These shared assumptions can be particularly difficult to spot precisely because everyone around you holds them too. The practice of assumption testing requires intellectual humility, the willingness to be wrong about what you think you know. This isn't comfortable, but it's essential for genuine critical thinking. The most dangerous assumptions are often those you're most certain about, the ones that seem too obvious to question. Remember that assumptions aren't inherently bad. They're necessary tools for navigating complexity. The goal isn't to eliminate them, but to hold them more consciously, to recognize them as working hypotheses rather than absolute truths. This creates the mental flexibility needed to adapt as circumstances change and new information emerges. This fifth SMART principle, test assumptions, works synergistically with the others. Slowing down creates space to notice assumptions. Mapping perspectives reveals different assumptions at play. Asking better questions helps uncover hidden assumptions. And recognizing patterns helps distinguish valid assumptions from limiting ones. Chapter 12. Decision Making. Clarity when it matters most. You know the feeling, staring at a life-changing decision, mind racing with possibilities, each option spawning new considerations until the sheer weight of analysis leaves you paralyzed. The more you think, the less clear things become. Your usually reliable mind seems to work against you, generating endless scenarios without moving you closer to resolution. This paralysis reveals a profound paradox. Sometimes, the very mental capacities that serve us well in analysis become obstacles to effective choice. Your sophisticated brain, capable of considering multiple angles and projecting future scenarios, can create so much mental noise that it drowns out the signal of wisdom trying to emerge. The challenge isn't that you lack information or intelligence. Rather, common decision traps hijack your natural capacity for clear thinking. Analysis paralysis tricks you into believing that if you just think a little longer or gather a bit more data, certainty will emerge. But in a complex world, perfect certainty is impossible. The quest for it often prevents good decisions rather than enabling them. Emotional reactivity presents another trap, where momentary feelings override deeper wisdom. While emotions provide valuable information, allowing them to drive decisions without proper integration with reason often leads to choices you later regret. Yet completely suppressing emotions isn't the answer either. They contain important signals about what truly matters to you. Hindsight bias compounds these challenges by creating unrealistic expectations about decision-making. When examining past choices, outcomes often seem more predictable than they actually were. This creates an illusion that good decisions should somehow guarantee desired results, leading to unnecessary pressure and second-guessing. These traps stem from a fundamental misunderstanding about what constitutes effective decision-making. The quality of a decision isn't determined by its outcome, which involves factors beyond your control, but by the soundness of the process that led to it. A well-reasoned choice can sometimes produce unwanted results, just as poor decisions occasionally yield lucky outcomes. Instead of seeking perfect prediction, which is impossible, focus on creating a decision process that integrates multiple forms of intelligence, analytical reasoning, emotional wisdom, and intuitive knowing. This integration becomes possible when you match your mental investment to the nature of the choice at hand. Not every decision deserves deep analysis. Many choices are reversible or have limited consequences. These require just enough consideration to avoid obvious pitfalls. Conserve your mental energy for truly consequential decisions where careful deliberation adds value. This right-sizing of mental effort prevents decision fatigue while ensuring important choices receive proper attention. The SMART principles offer a practical framework for elevating decision quality without falling into overthinking. Slowing down creates space to recognize decision traps as they arise. Mapping perspectives reveals options and consequences you might otherwise miss. Asking better questions helps distinguish between essential and superficial factors. Recognizing patterns shows how similar choices played out in the past. Testing assumptions challenges the unconscious beliefs that might be limiting your options. When you approach decisions this way, clarity often emerges not from finding perfect answers, but from properly framing the question. Instead of asking, "What's the right choice?" which implies a single correct answer, ask, "What choice best aligns with my values and current understanding?" This subtle shift transforms decision-making from a search for certainty into an expression of wisdom. The practice of decision journaling provides a powerful tool for developing this wisdom over time. By documenting not just what you decide, but how you decide, the factors considered, assumptions made, emotions present, you create a learning laboratory for refining your decision process. This isn't about judging past choices, but about recognizing patterns and building self-trust. Many struggle with decisions because they fear regret. But regret comes not from making wrong choices, but from making choices unconsciously or against your deeper knowledge. When you bring full awareness to the decision process, honoring both reason and intuition, you develop trust in your capacity to navigate complexity with wisdom. This shift from fear to trust transforms decision-making from a burden into an opportunity for growth. Each choice becomes a chance to align more deeply with your authentic values, to strengthen your inner compass. Even when outcomes differ from expectations, you remain grounded in the knowledge that you chose with presence and integrity, rather than reactivity or avoidance. Your relationship with uncertainty evolves. Instead of seeing it as a threat to overcome, you recognize it as the very space where wisdom emerges. Chapter 13. Creative Problem Solving, Breaking Through Mental Blocks. When you repeatedly attack a problem from every logical angle only to reach the same dead end, it's not just frustrating, it's revelatory. This experience reveals how your most reliable thinking patterns can become invisible constraints, limiting possibilities precisely because they seem so reasonable. The very mental frameworks that typically serve you well can transform into unconscious boundaries, creating a form of intellectual prison you can't see or touch, but whose walls are nonetheless real. This paradox lies at the heart of effective problem solving. Sometimes clarity requires deliberately disrupting the very thinking patterns you've worked so hard to develop. While the previous chapters have focused on developing critical thinking skills, there's a complementary truth. Innovation often emerges not from refining logical analysis, but from temporarily suspending it. Your mind naturally oscillates between two essential modes of thought. Convergent thinking narrows possibilities toward a single, best answer, applying logic and analysis to evaluate options and reach conclusions. This is the domain of traditional critical thinking, where the SMART principles help you systematically analyze situations and make reasoned decisions. Divergent thinking, by contrast, expands possibilities outward, generating multiple options without immediate judgment. This creative mode doesn't replace critical thinking, but complements it. Like breathing out after breathing in, both are necessary for cognitive health. Mental blocks often occur when you become stuck in convergent mode, trying to force breakthrough insights through pure analysis. Understanding this dynamic transforms how you approach persistent problems. When conventional thinking leads repeatedly to the same dead ends, it signals the need to shift modes, not because your analysis is wrong, but because the solution likely lies outside your current mental maps. 3 specific techniques powerfully complement the SMART principles by deliberately disrupting standard thinking patterns. Reframing involves radically shifting how you define the problem itself. Instead of asking, "How do I solve this?" you might ask, "What if this apparent problem is actually pointing toward an opportunity?" This simple shift can reveal solutions invisible from within the original problem frame. Constraint addition seems counterintuitive, deliberately imposing limitations when you're already stuck. Yet artificial constraints often force creative breakthroughs by making conventional solutions impossible. What if you had to solve this problem without money, without speaking, without using technology? These arbitrary limitations push thinking in new directions. Analogical reasoning involves deliberately importing patterns from seemingly unrelated domains. How would nature solve this problem? What would this challenge look like if it were a musical composition rather than a business issue? These cross-domain connections often reveal fresh approaches precisely because they bypass logical analysis. The challenge isn't that you lack creative capacity. It's that habitual thinking patterns and premature judgment often suppress it. When facing a persistent problem, you likely experience a familiar cycle: initial exploration, growing frustration, increased analytical effort, and finally, mental gridlock. This pattern reflects process issues rather than capability limitations. To break free from this cycle, you must learn to create what I call productive friction, deliberately introducing elements that disrupt your default thinking patterns. This isn't about abandoning critical thinking, but about creating space for new possibilities before applying analytical judgment. The mountain lake metaphor extends here in an unexpected way. Just as clarity emerges when turbulent waters settle, creative insights often arise not from more aggressive analysis, but from deliberately disturbing, comfortable thought patterns. This controlled disruption, followed by renewed clarity, creates the conditions for genuine innovation. Your most persistent problems, whether technical challenges, interpersonal conflicts, or personal limitations, often resist solutions precisely because they sit at the edge of your current thinking patterns. Breaking through requires not just thinking harder, but thinking differently, using constraints and contradictions as tools rather than obstacles. When you encounter these stubborn situations, your instinct might be to double down on familiar approaches, analyzing more intensely or gathering additional data. But this rarely works because you're still operating within the same mental framework that created the impasse. True breakthroughs emerge when you learn to embrace the very elements that make you uncomfortable: the apparent contradictions, the frustrating limitations, the seemingly impossible constraints. These aren't barriers to progress. They're signposts pointing toward unexplored territory in your thinking. Chapter 14: Information Literacy: Navigating the Knowledge Landscape. In today's digital landscape, you're confronted with an overwhelming array of information sources, each claiming authority and truth. Open any search engine to research an important topic, whether it's health, finances, or current events, and you'll immediately face a barrage of contradictory expert opinions, competing studies, and conflicting recommendations. This cacophony of voices, each demanding attention and credibility, creates a peculiar modern paradox. Access to more information often leads to less clarity rather than more. The transformation of our information environment has fundamentally altered how we must approach critical thinking. Information no longer flows through traditional gatekeepers or established channels. It moves at unprecedented speed through complex networks, shaped by algorithms we can't see and influenced by motivations we don't fully understand. This new landscape creates distinct challenges that the conventional wisdom about critical thinking fails to address. Consider how information reaches you now. Algorithms curate what appears in your feeds, creating invisible boundaries around what you encounter. Context collapses as pieces of information are separated from their original framing, making it increasingly difficult to evaluate their validity or relevance. The sheer volume of content exceeds any individual's capacity to process. leading to cognitive shortcuts that can compromise discernment. These conditions create specific thinking traps that undermine clear judgment. When faced with overwhelming amounts of information, it's tempting to give up on evaluation entirely, treating all sources as equally valid or invalid. Or you might find yourself cherry-picking information that confirms existing beliefs while dismissing contradictory evidence, regardless of its merit. Perhaps most dangerously, complex topics get reduced to simplistic either-or positions, losing the nuance essential for genuine understanding. Yet information consumption is never truly passive. Your mental models actively shape what you notice, absorb, and remember. The same article or study will be interpreted differently based on your existing knowledge, beliefs, and the context through which you encounter it. Understanding this active nature of information processing is crucial for developing more sophisticated evaluation strategies. The key lies in developing practical heuristics that balance healthy skepticism with genuine receptivity. This begins with source evaluation, not just checking credentials, but understanding perspective and potential biases. Content analysis follows, examining the quality of evidence and consistency of reasoning. Context consideration involves understanding how and why information is being presented, while personal reflection requires honest examination of how your own biases influence interpretation. These principles create a foundation for what we might call information triangulation, building understanding through multiple sources with different perspectives. This approach acknowledges that no single source provides complete truth, while avoiding the trap of assuming all sources are equally valid. It requires engaging with competing viewpoints, not to find which one is right, but to understand how different perspectives illuminate different aspects of complex issues. The modern information landscape presents genuine challenges that can feel overwhelming. Yet these challenges also create opportunities for developing more sophisticated thinking skills. The key lies not in finding perfect sources or foolproof verification methods, but in cultivating discernment that balances critical evaluation with openness to new understanding. When you encounter contradictory expert opinions or competing claims, the goal isn't to determine absolute truth, but to build nuanced understanding through careful evaluation. This process begins by examining how information reaches you and acknowledging the active role you play in constructing meaning from it. From there, systematic application of evaluation principles helps navigate complex topics without falling into either naive acceptance or cynical dismissal. This balance is particularly crucial when exploring contentious topics where emotional investment runs high and certainty feels appealing. Rather than seeking definitive answers, focus on building frameworks for evaluation that can be applied across different domains. This approach transforms information overload from a source of paralysis into an opportunity for developing more sophisticated understanding. Remember that discernment isn't about never being wrong. It's about maintaining intellectual humility while systematically building understanding. In a landscape where certainty is often an illusion, true wisdom lies in knowing how to navigate complexity rather than seeking simple answers. When you embrace uncertainty as a natural part of growth, you free yourself from the paralysis of perfectionism and the need to be right all the time. Your strength emerges not from having all the answers, but from staying grounded in curiosity while moving forward with purpose. The path to deeper insight requires accepting that your current understanding, no matter how well reasoned, remains incomplete. And that's not just okay. It's essential for genuine intellectual development. Chapter 15. Interpersonal Intelligence. Thinking clearly in relationship. When emotions run high in close relationships, even the most rational minds can become clouded. Your interpretation of events, your assessment of others' intentions, and your decision-making processes all become influenced by complex emotional and psychological dynamics that often operate below conscious awareness. This creates a unique challenge for critical thinking, one where traditional logical approaches prove insufficient. The intimate nature of close relationships activates deep psychological patterns that fundamentally alter how you process information and make decisions. Your attachment history, the accumulated experiences from past relationships, creates powerful templates that automatically shape how you interpret current interactions. These templates operate like invisible lenses, filtering all relationship information through established patterns of expectation and response. Emotional triggers in relationships bypass your rational mind with remarkable speed and efficiency. Before you can engage conscious analysis, your nervous system has already initiated responses based on past experiences rather than present reality. These lightning-fast reactions served crucial survival purposes in human evolution. But in modern relationships, they often create distortions that undermine clear thinking. The phenomenon of projection compounds these challenges. You naturally attribute your own qualities, motivations, and expectations to others, creating a form of psychological mirroring that can severely distort perception. This tendency becomes particularly pronounced in close relationships, where emotional investment is highest and objectivity most challenging to maintain. Relationship systems develop their own implicit rules and patterns over time, creating self-reinforcing cycles that resist conscious examination. Even when you recognize these patterns intellectually, breaking free from them requires more than logical understanding. It demands awareness of how emotional and systemic forces shape your thinking in real time. These dynamics create specific thinking traps that compromise clarity in relationships. Mind reading, the assumption that you know others' thoughts and intentions, becomes nearly automatic with people you know well. Personalizing leads you to interpret others' behavior primarily through the lens of what it means about you or your relationship, missing crucial context. Catastrophizing amplifies relationship fears into worst-case scenarios, while false choice thinking reduces complex relationship dynamics into oversimplified either-or options. Maintaining clear perception within emotionally charged interactions requires developing specific capacities. Emotional self-regulation allows you to manage your reactions without suppressing feelings, creating space for more objective assessment. Genuine perspective-taking moves beyond simple empathy to understand how others' experiences shape their perception and behavior. Assumption testing becomes crucial in relationships where familiarity breeds automatic interpretations that may or may not be accurate. System awareness represents perhaps the most sophisticated level of relationship thinking, recognizing how individual interactions fit within larger patterns, and how changing these patterns requires understanding the whole system rather than focusing solely on specific behaviors or issues. The paradox of relationship intelligence is that while close relationships create the greatest obstacles to clear thinking, they also provide the richest opportunities for developing sophisticated cognitive skills. The emotional challenges that compromise clarity also motivate deeper understanding and more nuanced perception when approached with awareness. Relational mindfulness, maintaining clear perception within emotionally charged interactions, requires integrating emotional intelligence with critical thinking in ways that honor both logic and feeling. This integration allows you to navigate relationship complexity without falling into either cold rationality or emotional reactivity. The key lies in developing the capacity to hold multiple perspectives simultaneously: your emotional experience, your rational assessment, your understanding of others' viewpoints, and your awareness of larger relationship patterns. This multidimensional awareness creates space for both connection and clarity, allowing you to maintain perspective without sacrificing emotional authenticity. This balance becomes particularly crucial during relationship conflicts, where the pressure to react automatically is strongest. Rather than trying to eliminate emotional responses, which would be neither possible nor desirable, the goal is to create space around them, allowing both feeling and thinking to inform your understanding and choices. Remember that relationship patterns, while powerful, are not destiny. By developing awareness of how these dynamics influence your thinking, you can begin to make more conscious choices about how you interpret and respond to relationship situations. This awareness transforms relationship challenges from sources of confusion into opportunities for deeper understanding and more skillful navigation of human connection. Your closest relationships, while often the most challenging context for maintaining clear thinking, also provide the most powerful laboratory for developing sophisticated cognitive and emotional skills. The very dynamics that create confusion can, with awareness, become catalysts for developing more nuanced understanding and more skillful ways of processing relationship information. Chapter 16: Cultural Thinking: Seeing Beyond Your Conditioning. When you step off a plane in a foreign country, something remarkable happens to your mind. Suddenly, things you've always taken for granted as just how things are reveal themselves as merely one way among many possibilities. The simple act of ordering coffee or greeting a stranger becomes a window into how deeply cultural frameworks shape every aspect of perception and behavior. These moments of cultural dislocation illuminate a profound truth about critical thinking. Many of our most fundamental assumptions about reality aren't universal truths, but cultural constructions. What you consider logical, natural, or self-evident often reflects specific cultural patterns rather than objective reality. Cultural frameworks operate at multiple levels, creating a complex architecture that shapes thought and behavior. At the surface level, visible practices and customs catch your attention. The obvious differences in how people eat, dress, or organize their daily routines. Beneath these observable patterns lie expressed values, the principles and ideals a culture articulates explicitly through its institutions, laws, and social norms. But the most powerful layer operates largely invisibly: core assumptions about the nature of reality itself. These deep cultural patterns shape how you define what constitutes a problem worth solving, how you attribute causation when explaining events, which values take precedence in decision-making, and what you consider normal or proper behavior. The more deeply these cultural patterns are internalized, the more invisible they become. Like fish unaware of water, you navigate your cultural environment without consciously registering its influence on your thinking. These frameworks don't just influence your conclusions, they shape what questions you can ask, what possibilities you can imagine, and what solutions seem reasonable. Consider how different cultures understand the relationship between individual and community, time and progress, humans and nature, or mind and body. These aren't merely philosophical abstractions, but fundamental lenses that filter all perception and guide all action. They create the boundaries of what seems possible or impossible, rational or irrational, right or wrong. Gaining perspective on these cultural patterns requires specific practices that create distance from your default framework. Exposure to genuine cultural difference, not as a tourist but as a humble learner, reveals alternatives to what you assumed was universal. Historical awareness helps you understand how current patterns evolved, rather than seeing them as timeless truths. Linguistic sensitivity offers another powerful tool, as different languages encode different possibilities for thinking and perceiving. Becoming aware of your social location, how your specific position within various cultural identities shapes your perspective, provides yet another lens for examining cultural conditioning. This awareness doesn't require rejecting your cultural heritage or adopting a position of pure relativism. Instead, it allows you to engage more consciously with your cultural inheritance, choosing which elements serve wisdom and which create unnecessary limitations. The goal isn't to transcend culture entirely, an impossible task, but to develop the capacity to recognize and work skillfully with cultural patterns. When you examine any significant issue through diverse cultural frameworks, new possibilities for understanding and action emerge. Workplace conflicts transform when viewed through different cultural lenses around hierarchy, communication, and cooperation. Global challenges appear differently when you can genuinely grasp how other cultures define problems and envision solutions. Even personal values and life choices reveal their cultural contingency without losing their genuine meaning. Understanding that your ideals of success, happiness, or purpose reflect specific cultural patterns allows you to hold them more consciously and adapt them more flexibly to changing circumstances. The practice of cultural perspective taking requires moving beyond both defensive reactions that reject all differences and superficial tourism that romanticizes other cultures. It demands maintaining genuine curiosity while still exercising critical judgment, appreciating diversity without losing discernment. This cultural awareness integrates with and enhances all aspects of critical thinking. When you recognize how cultural frameworks shape perception, you gain new tools for questioning assumptions, mapping perspectives, recognizing patterns, and making well-considered decisions. A key question emerges. What becomes possible when you can see beyond the invisible boundaries of your cultural conditioning? What insights and solutions might emerge when you can draw from multiple cultural frameworks rather than being confined to just one? As you develop this capacity for cultural awareness, your thinking becomes simultaneously more grounded in universal wisdom and more appreciative of genuine cultural differences. This paradoxical achievement, finding common ground while honoring diversity, represents a crucial evolution in critical thinking for our interconnected world. Chapter 17, Mental Resilience, Thinking Clearly Under Pressure. Every day presents moments where your ability to think clearly under pressure determines outcomes that matter deeply. Whether facing a crucial presentation, navigating a relationship crisis, or making split-second decisions that affect others' well-being, pressure tests the limits of your cognitive capacity. These high-stakes situations reveal an essential truth about critical thinking. It's not just about knowing what to do, but maintaining access to that knowledge when circumstances make clear thinking most challenging, yet most vital. The impact of stress on cognitive function creates a cascading effect that fundamentally alters how your brain processes information. When pressure mounts, your attention naturally narrows, reducing peripheral awareness and limiting your ability to see the full scope of situations. Your working memory capacity diminishes, making it harder to hold multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously. Time perception distorts, creating a sense of urgency that may not match reality. Perhaps most significantly, emotional responses amplify, coloring perception and judgment in ways that can dramatically impact decision quality. These neurological changes manifest as specific thinking limitations that can sabotage your effectiveness precisely when you need it most. Tunnel vision sets in, causing you to see fewer options and possibilities than actually exist. Decision-making becomes reactive, driven by the desire for immediate relief rather than thoughtful consideration of long-term outcomes. Cognitive rigidity increases, making it harder to shift perspective or consider alternative viewpoints. Catastrophic thinking emerges, where worst-case scenarios seem not just possible, but probable. Understanding these patterns reveals how physical, emotional, and cognitive resilience form an interconnected system. Physical tension creates emotional stress, which impairs cognitive function, leading to decisions that create more physical tension, a self-reinforcing cycle that can rapidly degrade performance. However, this same interconnection means that strengthening any part of the system positively impacts the whole. Maintaining cognitive access under pressure requires developing specific capacities that work together to support clear thinking in challenging conditions. Physiological regulation, the ability to manage your body's stress response, creates the foundation for emotional awareness. This capacity to recognize feeling states without being controlled by them enables more deliberate attentional control. With regulated attention, you can maintain a broader perspective even in difficult moments, seeing beyond immediate pressures to consider wider context and longer-term implications. The challenge of maintaining clarity under pressure is real and universal. It's not a personal failing, but a natural human response to stress. However, like any capacity, resilience can be systematically developed through practice, with gradually increasing challenges. Just as physical training builds strength through progressive overload, cognitive resilience grows through managed exposure to pressure situations. The contrast between reactive and responsive mental states dramatically affects both perception and choice. In reactive mode, options seem limited, threats loom large, and decisions are driven by immediate emotional relief. In responsive mode, you maintain access to your full cognitive capacity, seeing more possibilities and making choices aligned with deeper values rather than momentary pressures. Building this resilience requires stress inoculation, deliberately exposing yourself to manageable challenges that strengthen your capacity to maintain clarity under pressure. This practice must be calibrated carefully. Too little challenge provides no growth, while too much can be overwhelming. The key is finding the productive edge where challenge meets capability, then gradually expanding that edge through consistent practice. Several common obstacles can impede resilience development. Avoidance of discomfort leads to bypassing growth opportunities, while perfectionism creates unrealistic expectations that generate additional stress. The solution isn't eliminating these tendencies, but working with them skillfully through graduated exposure rather than overwhelming challenge. This process of building mental resilience directly enhances your ability to apply all aspects of critical thinking under pressure. The SMART principles become most valuable precisely when they're hardest to access, in those crucial moments where clarity makes all the difference. Through dedicated practice, you develop the capacity to maintain cognitive access even amid intense challenges, transforming pressure from an obstacle to an opportunity for demonstrating your highest capabilities. Chapter 18: Wisdom in Action, the Art of Living Thoughtfully. Life reveals itself not in dramatic turning points, but in the countless small choices that shape each day. These seemingly minor decisions, how you respond to a colleague's comment, whether you pause before reacting to news, what you choose to focus on at any given moment, gradually accumulate to create the texture and direction of your existence. While we often imagine critical thinking as something reserved for major decisions or complex problems, its true power emerges in this ongoing stream of daily living. The journey toward clearer thinking ultimately transcends technique to become an orientation to life itself, a way of moving through the world with greater awareness, discernment, and wisdom. This transformation involves balancing fundamental tensions that characterize thoughtful living. You must maintain helpful structures without becoming rigid, plan for the future while remaining present in each moment, and hold convictions while staying open to mystery and possibility. These opposing forces create a dynamic field where wisdom can emerge. Structure provides necessary support for growth, yet too much structure stifles spontaneity and adaptation. Planning enables intentional progress, yet excessive focus on the future robs you of present experience. Certainty offers stability and direction, yet wonder keeps you humble and open to new understanding. The art lies not in choosing one side over another, but in maintaining creative tension between these polarities. This balance manifests differently across life domains. In relationships, it appears as the capacity to deeply understand others while maintaining healthy boundaries, being fully present with people without losing yourself in their needs or emotions. In work, it shows up as pursuing excellence without attaching your worth to achievement, giving your best while remembering that you are more than what you produce. In personal growth, it emerges as accepting yourself completely while continuously evolving, loving who you are while remaining committed to who you might become. Rather than seeking definitive answers, this approach embraces living questions, open inquiries that guide action without demanding immediate resolution. Questions like, what matters most right now? Or, what am I not seeing? Create space for wisdom to emerge naturally. These questions provide direction while maintaining flexibility, offering structure without imposing rigidity. The challenge of living thoughtfully is ongoing. There is no arrival point where you finally get it right. Yet this very imperfection is not a flaw in the process, but an essential part of the path. Each mistake or limitation becomes an opportunity for deeper understanding, each challenge an invitation to greater wisdom. Imagine a life characterized by clarity without rigidity, where critical thinking enhances rather than diminishes authentic living. This state allows you to move through challenges with grace, respond to others with understanding, and navigate complexity with wisdom. Not because you've mastered perfect techniques, but because you've developed a way of being that naturally aligns with deeper truth. The practice of wisdom review offers a simple yet powerful way to cultivate this orientation over time. Rather than judging your days as successes or failures, this reflection focuses on noticing patterns, understanding context, and recognizing opportunities for growth. The emphasis stays on learning rather than evaluation, wisdom rather than perfection. Common obstacles arise in this integration process. Compartmentalization, treating different life areas as separate domains, can prevent wisdom from flowing naturally across contexts. Consistency bias, the tendency to see yourself as more consistent than you are, can blind you to important patterns and opportunities for growth. Yet these challenges themselves become opportunities for deeper understanding when approached with awareness and compassion. The journey of critical thinking thus comes full circle. What began as an effort to clear mental turbulence evolves into an embrace of clarity as a natural way of being. This clarity was never something to achieve, but rather something to uncover, a capacity that has always been within you, waiting to be recognized and trusted. The transformation occurs not through adding more knowledge, but through removing the obstacles to wisdom that already exists within. Like the mountain lake returning to its natural state of clarity, when disturbance settles, your mind reveals its inherent wisdom when mental turbulence subsides. This is not about becoming someone new, but about trusting who you've always been beneath the noise and confusion. Each moment of stillness brings you closer to this fundamental truth, that clarity isn't something you achieve through effort, but something you allow to emerge naturally when you stop resisting your own deeper knowing. The very act of seeking wisdom can sometimes become another layer of disturbance, another way of telling yourself you're not yet complete. But just as the lake needs no instruction to become clear, your mind knows its own path to clarity when you give it space to settle into its natural state. Conclusion. As we return to the mountain lake metaphor that opened our journey together, you now see it with new eyes. What began as a simple image has deepened into a living metaphor for your own mind, sometimes clear and reflective, sometimes clouded and turbulent, but always containing the potential for clarity when given the right conditions. Throughout these chapters, you've discovered that critical thinking isn't about adding more techniques or mastering complex frameworks. Instead, it's about removing the obstacles that prevent your natural wisdom from emerging. Like a mountain lake naturally settles when undisturbed, your mind naturally finds clarity when freed from the turbulence of reactive patterns, unconscious assumptions, and hurried thinking. The SMART principles, slow down, map perspectives, ask better questions, recognize patterns, test assumptions, work together not as rigid steps, but as gentle reminders that guide you back to your innate capacity for clear thought. You've seen how slowing down creates the space where wisdom can emerge, how mapping perspectives reveals possibilities hidden by limited viewpoints, how better questions open doors to deeper understanding, how pattern recognition transforms chaos into meaning, and how testing assumptions frees you from invisible constraints. You've explored how these principles apply across the full spectrum of life, from making decisions and solving problems to navigating relationships and cultural complexities. You've discovered that maintaining clarity under pressure isn't about perfect control, but about trusting your developed capacity to meet challenges with composure and wisdom. Perhaps most importantly, you've learned that setbacks aren't failures but natural parts of the journey. When mental turbulence returns, as it inevitably will, you now have the understanding and tools to work with it skillfully rather than fighting against it. Each moment of confusion becomes an opportunity to practice, each challenge a chance to deepen your capacity for clarity. This journey hasn't given you something new, but has helped you recognize what was always present, your natural capacity for clear, insightful thinking. Like the still waters of the mountain lake reflect the sky above, your mind naturally mirrors reality with pristine clarity when free from disturbance. As you close these chapters, remember that this ending is really a beginning. The real journey happens not in reading, but in living, in bringing these insights into your daily experiences, decisions, and relationships. Trust in your growing capacity to meet life's complexities with wisdom and composure. The clarity you seek has always been within you, waiting to be uncovered. Your mind, like the mountain lake, contains depths of wisdom and reflection. All that's needed is your willingness to create the conditions where clarity can naturally emerge. Trust this process. Trust yourself. The journey continues, but you now walk it with greater awareness, understanding, and confidence in your capacity to think clearly, precisely, when you need it most. Thank you for listening and for investing in yourself. I believe in you. Thank you for listening and for investing in yourself. I believe in you. Your potential is endless. Now go out there and create the life you deserve.